My name is Captain Katie Harvey, 27 years old, United States Army. 30 minutes before I was supposed to get married, my mother-in-law struck a gold Zippo and set my handmade wedding dress on fire, laughing that soldiers don't belong in silk. What she didn't know? The whole thing was live. What would you have done? Drop your thoughts below, and hit subscribe for more stories where respect is earned the hard way. The first thing that registered wasn't sight. It was smell. That acrid chemical stench that claws its way up the back of your throat. The kind that tells you something beautiful is being unmade. 1 second, my wedding dress hung pristine from its hook, the silk catching soft morning light. The next, it was a column of hungry orange flame. The heat rolled off it in waves, dry and blistering, turning the air in the bridal suite into a shimmering haze. The fire didn't roar. It hissed, venomous, deliberate. Behind me, my bridesmaids gasped. The sound hit all at once, like a collective intake of breath before a blast wave. But I didn't move. I didn't scream. My body stayed still while my training did the rest. Threat assessment, 1 hostile. Identity, Margaret Wilson, mother of the groom. Motive, eliminate perceived contamination. Establish control through spectacle. Asset destroyed. Handmade wedding dress. 6 months labor. Sentimental and monetary value high. Enemy intent. Pre-ceremony psychological warfare. The years I spent at West Point had conditioned my body to respond to chaos with clarity. My pulse slowed. My breathing evened out. I took in the scene the way I'd been trained to take in a hostile zone. Edges, exits, obstacles. Margaret stood near the vanity, lighter in hand, her manicured thumb still resting on the trigger. Her expression was almost serene. "I told Jason," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The Wilsons do not marry soldiers who roll around in the mud." The firelight flickered across her face, painting her eyes with gold. I said nothing. Words were fuel. Silence was containment. From the far corner of the room, Sergeant Jessica Reyes didn't flinch. My maid of honor, my oldest friend from my first deployment. She stood ramrod straight, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed forward. Not frozen in fear, but waiting for orders. Behind her, the other bridesmaids mirrored her stance instinctively. Civilian guests might have seen it as shock. I saw it for what it was. Discipline. Formation. Margaret mistook their stillness for submission. She mistook my quiet for defeat. Her lips curled into something cruel. "You really thought you could walk into our family with that cheap little medal," she said, her gaze flicking to the bronze star pinned discreetly inside my robe. "You think it means something? It's just metal. Bought respect." I didn't answer. My silence only fed her arrogance. What she didn't notice was the small black rectangle propped on the vanity beside her. My phone. The screen glowed faintly, its tiny green light blinking in rhythm. For the last 20 minutes, a private live stream had been running, a tradition between me and my unit. A window for my brothers and sisters in Germany to watch the ceremony they couldn't attend. Now, unknowingly, she had stepped onto their battlefield. The air thickened with smoke. The scent of scorched satin mingled with burnt perfume and hairspray, a toxic mix that made the back of my eyes sting. Through it all, I studied her face. Every twitch, every flicker of triumph. She wasn't just cruel. She was confident. And confidence, I'd learned, is often the first crack. Behind her, a single spark drifted down and touched the polished hardwood. It fizzled out harmlessly, but it was enough to make the bridesmaids shift. 1 small, unified step backward, forming a half circle. Not retreat, just containment. My father's voice echoed in my head. Steady as ever. "You can't choose the fires you face, Katie girl. You can only choose how you walk through them." Margaret took a step closer, the firelight gleaming off her gold necklace. "You don't belong in our world," she hissed. "You'll never give orders in this house." That was the line. The declaration of war. I moved. 3 precise steps forward. My fingers closed around the phone with the same surety I used to handle a sidearm. No shaking, no hesitation. I turned the screen toward her. Her face stared back. Live, glowing, undeniable. Mrs. Wilson, I said quietly, each word deliberate. You have no idea what you've just done. The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to pause. People think wars start with explosions. Most of them start with a raised eyebrow. Thanksgiving at the Wilson estate was my first lesson. Lake Erie looked like slate under a November sky as I carried a pumpkin pie up the stone steps, palms sweating through the oven mitts. My grandmother's recipe. 2 days of careful work, the crust fluted just right. The filling set with a shine only my mother ever got perfect. The foyer swallowed me whole. Marble floors, a chandelier like a star cluster, a painting the size of a garage door. Margaret floated toward me in a cream sweater that probably cost more than my monthly BAH. I held the pie like a peace offering. How, homie, she said, eyes skimming it like a customs officer searching luggage. She didn't take it. She pivoted, already bored. Maria? For the staff. A tiny muscle in her cheek moved, just once. The pie left my hands. It was the smallest thing, and it was everything. I smiled, because that's what you do when a door closes and you're still in the hallway. Dinner was a masterclass in polite exclusion. She spoke at the table the way a conductor leads a symphony. Melissa Hammond, Monaco, a Sabby's auction, a house in the Hamptons. Each story polished to a high sheen, each detail placed with care. I nodded through cranberry sauce and the quiet squeeze of Jason's hand under the table. I knew what she was doing. Establishing terrain, framing the map so I'd always be off the edge. Christmas came with fresh snow and another skirmish. I'd hunted for weeks for a first edition volume on Civil War maneuver doctrine. Richard's eyes lit when he unwrapped it. Fingertips grazing the leather like he was touching history itself. For a moment I saw a path. Bookshelves and debates and a father-in-law who respected thought and study. Then Margaret's voice. Oh, Richard, darling, do we really have room for more dust? She turned to me, smile bright enough to cut. Katie, next time a nice bottle of wine will do. Simpler, more suited to our standards. Standards. In the Army, the word means the minimum you will not fall below. In that house, it meant the ceiling you will never reach. The day that cut the deepest was quieter. I arrived early to pick up Jason and heard them in his father's study, voices traveling down the hallway like cold air. Love doesn't pay yacht club dues, she said, low and tight. What can that girl offer you? Stories from a foxhole? You need a partner who advances you. Partner. In my world, a partner is the one who watches the angles while you scan downrange. In hers, it was line items, leverage, a social portfolio. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob and let the heat rise and pass. We're taught to fight the fight in front of us, not the one our anger invents. Jason walked me to the car that night, eyes shining with shame that wasn't his to carry. After we're married, he said, voice soft but certain, it'll be different. She'll have to accept you. I tucked the promise away like a map folded to the one road out. West Point taught me a lot about roads. Mostly that the only way out is through. Forced marches before sunrise, the ruck straps biting through damp PT shirts, chow that never lasted as long as you wanted, blisters that turned to callus that turned to quiet confidence. There is a cadence you learn out there on the plain along the Hudson. Left, right, left. And a cadence you carry into rooms where people test whether you know how to keep it. Margaret tested it constantly. A charity gala where place cards shifted at the last second, bumping me 2 tables back. A museum fundraiser where she introduced me as our soldier girl, the way people say, our mailman. A lunch where she corrected my pronunciation of a French pastry I'd never had, then offered to teach me which fork was appropriate for oysters. I can eat MREs blindfolded in a sandstorm and field strip an M4 with my offhand. I learned the oyster fork on a Tuesday and never used it wrong again. I treated each encounter like training. Note the terrain. Establish the enemy's preferred avenues of approach. Class, cost, curation. Identify the friendly assets. Richard's curiosity, Jason's core decency, the household staff's small kindnesses that told me how often they'd seen this play before. The enemy's center of gravity was visibility. If she could script the scene, she could win it. So I learned to choose my ground. Fewer direct confrontations, more quiet refusals. I said no, thank you, to the events that were just tests in tuxedos. I said yes to dinners where Richard did more talking and Margaret did more sipping. A small shift in fields of fire. None of this made me smaller. It made me precise. When I pinned the bronze star to the inside of my robe on the morning of the wedding, it wasn't a talisman. It was a receipt. A record of nights when the radio wouldn't quiet down and the road out was one bad decision wide. It was the weight of faces, a promise to choose the hard right over the easy wrong. I wasn't proud of the medal. I was proud of what it stood for when no one was looking. The bridal suite smelled like hairspray and peonies when we first arrived. Bridesmaids joked about sore feet and bobby pins. Jess checked her watch like it was an inspection. We had a timeline, a plan. I kept my phone on the vanity, propped on a makeup bag, camera angled toward the doorway and the arc of the room. It started as a window for my unit, a private moment stretched across time zones. It became, without fanfare, part of the safety plan I didn't know I'd need. Because small wars teach you something vital. Big explosions aren't the real danger. It's the slow burn. The ember you ignore because it's easier than chasing it down. The story told about you in rooms you're not in. So when the flame finally arrived, louder, brighter, viciously public, I wasn't surprised. You don't get to choose the fires you face. Only how you walk into them and how you walk out. And I was already walking. Margaret's voice cut through the smoke like shrapnel. You think you can stand in front of my son and command a life you don't deserve? You may give orders out there, but not in my house. Her hand trembled slightly as she pointed to the smoldering fabric on the floor. A flicker of fear crossed her face. Not because of the fire, but because she'd just said the quiet part out loud. Behind me, one of the bridesmaids whispered, "Katie." But I raised a hand, palm down. A silent signal drilled into all of us. Hold position. I turned the phone screen toward Margaret, slow and steady. Her image stared back at her, face twisted, lighter still clutched like a weapon. On the display, the comment feed scrolled. A dozen usernames from half a world away. Bravo Company watching from Stuttgart. Captain, we see it. We got your 6. She froze. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. "You're lying," she hissed. But then, through the phone's small speaker, came the unmistakable sound of boots, a cheer rising like distant thunder. A voice female, crisp and strong. "Captain Harvey, Bravo Company standing by." The words landed like artillery. Margaret's chin jerked upward. The mask slipped. Arrogance curdled into disbelief. Across the room, Sergeant Reyes moved with the calm precision of a drill floor. She stepped between us, not threatening, just present. Her voice was level, every syllable a warning wrapped in courtesy. "Ma'am, I would advise against further action. You've just committed destruction of property and verbal assault in front of multiple witnesses, civilian and military." The words weren't personal. They were procedural. That's what made them hit. Margaret's eyes darted toward the door, toward the cluster of guests who had begun to gather outside. I saw cell phones raised, faces pale and wide-eyed. One of Jason's cousins whispered something sharp. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. This wasn't a private humiliation anymore. It was a case study unfolding in real time. Then I heard the sound. Footsteps pounding against marble. The bridal suite door flew open so hard it rattled on its hinges. Jason stood there, chest heaving, tie half undone. His gaze swept the room, locking first on the rising smoke, then on his mother's hand, then on me. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking like ice under weight. Tell me I didn't just watch you set fire to Katie's dress. Margaret straightened her spine, but the power was gone. Jason, you don't understand. No, he snapped. I do. For once, I do. He took a step closer, the floor creaking under polished shoes. For a moment, all I could hear was the hiss of the dying fire and the low whine of the ceiling vent pulling the smoke away. Jason's jaw worked as if he were chewing on every apology he'd ever made for her. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. Officer steady. You always said respect was earned. Congratulations. You just lost mine. The room went silent. Margaret's mouth opened, then shut again. Behind her, the last flickers of my dress gave one final gasp of flame and went dark. From the doorway, a tall figure appeared, Richard Wilson, composed as ever, the weight of a lifetime in his eyes. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked. At me, at the phone still glowing in my hand, at his wife standing amid the ashes of something sacred. When he finally spoke, his tone was quiet, almost tender. Captain Harvey, he said, addressing me by rank, not relation. I'm deeply sorry. He turned to the nearest hotel staffer. Get security, and please document everything. No one argued. A man in a dark suit murmured into his radio. The words incident report and camera review drifted through the smoke. Margaret swayed where she stood, staring at the phone's lens like it was a rifle barrel. Her world, the one she controlled with money, charm, and whispered judgment, had just met a different kind of authority. One built on documentation, witnesses, and truth. And she was outnumbered. When I finally lowered the phone, my voice was steady. This isn't your house, Mrs. Wilson. It's the United States. And in this country, everyone answers for what they burn. Her face drained of color. The smoke hadn't even cleared when Richard Wilson stepped fully into the bridal suite. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and corporate damage control. But his voice carried the kind of authority that could silence a boardroom. Security, he said calmly to the nearest staff member. Get the incident supervisor. Preserve all CCTV footage covering this room and hallway. Nobody edits, nobody deletes. That was the first real pivot. Not shouting, not emotion, procedure. The staffer nodded and disappeared down the hall, already speaking into a radio. The word incident hung in the air like an order stamped in triplicate. I turned slightly, scanning my team. Bridesmaids, Jess, Jason. The old rhythm returned without me forcing it. Command voice steady, field of view clear, timeline forming in the back of my mind. All right, I said quietly, tone flat, efficient. We've got 20 minutes until ceremony start. Mission failure is not an option. It wasn't a metaphor. It was how I thought. Chaos only wins if you stop leading. Jess, you're my XO. Sit rep. Confirm everyone's calm and accounted for. No panic. She gave a short nod, already moving, checking on each bridesmaid with soft, low words, soldier's hands on trembling shoulders. Jason, I continued, turning to him, your guest liaison. Get downstairs. Find the wedding coordinator. Tell them we're adjusting the schedule for a wardrobe delay. Keep the guests steady. No details, no speculation. Copy? He hesitated only a breath before the muscle memory of command tone kicked in. Copy. And then he was gone, footsteps fading down the hall. Richard's eyes flicked to mine. For the first time that day, there was no distance in them, just recognition. Tell me what you need. Driver, I said. There's a boutique downtown, Michelle Keane Designs. Ask for the owner. She owes me a favor from a veterans fundraiser. I need a size 4, white or ivory, clean lines, no frills, delivery here in under 20. He didn't question. He just pulled out his phone. Done. While he spoke quietly to his assistant, I focused back on Margaret. She'd been silent through most of it, her breathing shallow. Now, slowly, she straightened. You think you've won something here? she said. Her voice wavered, but her instinct for theater was intact. Look at you, barking orders, turning my son's wedding into a parade ground. Everyone's going to see who you really are. I met her gaze evenly. Yes, I said. They are. The words weren't angry. They were factual. Jess returned, reporting softly, All accounted for, ma'am. No casualties. Morale steady. A flicker of dark humor crossed my mind. Even in a bridal suite, the language fit. At the doorway, a suited security officer appeared. Late 40s, professional calm, notebook already open. Evening, folks. I'm the duty supervisor. I understand there's been a fire incident. Richard gestured toward the charred remains. My wife ignited the object intentionally. We have live video and witnesses. The officer's pen paused mid-scribble. His tone stayed neutral. Understood, sir. We'll need to log this as deliberate property destruction. Ma'am, he said, glancing at me. Was anyone injured? No, sir, I replied. Containment achieved. He nodded once. Then I'll need brief statements. We'll file a formal report for insurance and safety compliance. Margaret's eyes darted to him, then back to Richard. You're really doing this? Calling security on your own wife? Richard's reply was quiet but absolute. You did this to yourself. The officer gestured politely toward the hallway. Ma'am, if you'll step outside, we can collect your version separately. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then Jess took a single step forward. Not threatening, just solid. Margaret exhaled through her nose, squared her shoulders, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, and the noise level in the room dropped by half. I let out a slow breath. The kind you take after a firefight ends and the dust is still settling. The adrenaline hadn't burned off yet, but the shape of control had returned. Richard ended his call. Driver's en route. They'll meet Keen in 10. I nodded once. Then we hold position until resupply. He gave a soft, incredulous laugh. You really are a commander. I looked down at the blackened silk, at the faint smoke curling from the scorched floor. No, I said quietly. I'm just someone who learned how to rebuild under fire. Outside, I heard the distant hum of a hotel generator, the low murmur of security radio chatter, the mechanical rhythm of order returning. The kind that doesn't care about last names or status, just facts, reports, and accountability. And for the first time all day, I felt something close to peace. The door closed behind security, and for the first time in nearly an hour, the air in the suite felt breathable again. Smoke lingered, faint and metallic, curling up toward the chandelier like ghosts of a battle we hadn't planned for. I checked my watch. 17 minutes until ceremony start. Enough time to regroup if the formation held. Sit rep? I asked, glancing toward Jess. All accounted for, she said. No injuries. Spirits, steadying. Good. I nodded, scanning the faces around me. A few puffy eyes, streaks of mascara. But every woman in that room stood upright. That was what mattered. Discipline wasn't just posture. It was recovery under pressure. Outside, I caught the distant sound of elevator chimes. Richard's voice followed, low but commanding. Make way, please. A moment later, his driver appeared in the doorway, suit immaculate, breathing hard. Over one arm, he carried a long white garment bag like it contained something sacred. Delivery for Captain Harvey, he said simply. He didn't need to say more. The bag landed on the table with a careful thump, and the sound alone cut through the last of the tension. Everyone moved at once, hands unzipping, breath catching. The new dress wasn't lace or tulle or fairy tale fluff. It was sleek ivory crepe, clean lines, weighty fabric that held its shape. The kind of dress that didn't whisper. It stood, strong, unadorned, defiant. I reached out and ran a hand over the material. Cool, smooth, substantial. It felt like armor. Melody, my fashion world bridesmaid, sprang into action. We can fit this, she murmured. Give me needle and thread. From somewhere in the chaos of makeup kits and curling irons, she produced a tiny sewing pouch. Jess helped her lift the dress. "Captain," Jess said, tone half joking, half serious. "Permission to rearm the bride?" "Granted," I said. They helped me step into it. Careful, quick, efficient. The heavy fabric settled across my shoulders and the room seemed to still. I caught my reflection in the mirror. The girl who'd spent 6 months hand-stitching a dream was gone. The woman staring back wore command. "Perfect," Melody breathed. "Strong lines. Minimal adjustment needed." "5 minutes to ceremony," Jess called, checking her phone like a field clock. I took the phone from the vanity. Still recording. Still live. Faces scrolled across the tiny screen. My soldiers in Germany. Still watching. Still standing by. I lifted it slightly, my voice clear. Calm. Steady. "Bravo, company. Update from command. Minor timeline change. Asset replaced. Mission continues as planned." The chat flooded instantly. Emojis, salutes, a single line that made me smile. "Never quit, ma'am. Always adapt." That's when my father stepped into the doorway. The old firefighter dress uniform fit him like the turnout gear he'd worn his whole life. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes glistening. "You ready, Captain?" I swallowed hard. "Ready, Dad." He held out his arm. I took it. The doors opened. Music drifted in, soft at first, then rising. Every head turned as we stepped into the courtyard. What I saw stopped me mid-breath. Rows of guests, friends, colleagues, strangers, rose to their feet. But it wasn't polite applause. It was something deeper. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the courtyard as people clapped, cheered, stood taller. And then, near the front, an old man with service ribbons on his chest lifted his hand in a crisp salute. Another followed. Then another. Marines, soldiers, a few firefighters. Uniforms in hearts, if not on backs. The applause swelled. Not for the dress, not for the spectacle, but for the act of standing. For the refusal to fold. My father's hand tightened around mine. His voice was a whisper meant only for me. Now that's a proper salute. As I walked down that aisle, the ivory fabric catching sunlight instead of flame, I realized something simple and absolute. You can destroy a symbol, but not what forged it. The mission hadn't failed. It had evolved. By the time the ceremony ended, the courtyard had transformed from a battlefield into a victory ground. The applause still echoed in my ears as we stepped into the grand reception hall. The same hall Margaret had curated down to the last flower, imagining herself at the center of every camera. Now, she was gone, escorted out before the ceremony began. And the space, stripped of her control, felt different. Lighter. Honest. The chandeliers threw gold light across the room as Jason and I entered. Every face turned toward us, not with polite curiosity, but with something deeper. Respect, maybe? Or understanding. It was hard to name. Phones were everywhere. At first, I braced for embarrassment, but the expressions weren't mocking. They were riveted. One of Jason's colleagues approached him quietly. "That live stream," he said, voice low but awed. "It's all over. Local vet pages picked it up. People are calling it the fire test." I felt a strange calm settle in. Once, that kind of exposure would have terrified me. Now, it just felt fair. We hadn't scripted anything. We'd simply held our ground and told the truth in real time. Across the room, I spotted Richard Wilson standing near the bar. Posture firm, tie loosened, every inch the CEO managing fallout. But this wasn't corporate cleanup. This was accountability. He caught my gaze and gave a single nod. The silent language of a man who had chosen sides. He walked to us, raising his voice just enough to carry across the nearest tables. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'd like to introduce my daughter, Captain Catherine Harvey, the toughest person in this family." Laughter rippled through the crowd. warm and genuine. The tension that had hovered since the fire began to dissolve. For the first time that day, I saw Jason exhale without guilt shadowing his face. Beatrice Astor, one of Margaret's oldest friends, drifted closer, clutching a champagne glass like it was a lifeline. Her voice carried the tremor of habit, not sincerity. Such a dramatic misunderstanding. She cooed. Margaret can be so overwrought. I turned toward her, tone gentle, words precise. In the Army, ma'am, we call that a hostile act, not overwrought. Her smile faltered, retreating behind the rim of her glass. Of course, my mistake. She backed away. The old social rules, whispered apologies, reputation buffers, evaporated under the weight of accountability. Near the entryway, Jess and the bridesmaids had repurposed the guest book table. A large corkboard stood where calligraphy pens once waited. Across the top, someone had scrawled in bold marker, Operation Enduring Love, After Action Report. Guests pinned notes instead of signatures. Honor runs deeper than money. Never underestimate a calm voice under fire. Your dad would be proud. I ran my fingers along the edges of the board, the rough cork catching against my skin. These weren't comments. They were commendations. Field reports from people who had seen a different kind of courage, not on a battlefield, but in a moment when dignity was tested. Later, when the plates had cleared and the music softened, Richard rose again with a glass in hand. The room stilled. To Jason and Katie, he said, who reminded us all today that respect is earned not by wealth, but by how we stand in the fire. He paused. In that spirit, I'm announcing a change. The Wilson Foundation will shift its focus toward veterans, especially women re-entering civilian life. The first project launches tonight, the Phoenix Initiative. The crowd broke into applause. The name landed like poetry. Out of ashes, purpose. Out of humiliation, structure. Jason leaned close, his voice soft against the roar. You changed the family's mission in a single day. I shook my head. We'd just corrected the chain of command. The night carried on, laughter, toasts, music. But beneath it ran something steadier, the kind of silence that follows clarity. Margaret's empire of influence had collapsed in one afternoon, and in its place a new standard had risen. Respect through conduct, not status. I didn't need to gloat. Justice didn't need spectacle. It just needed to be witnessed. And tonight, it was. The last guests drifted out under soft golden lights, their voices fading into the night. What remained was the quiet hum of aftermath. Chairs slightly askew, empty glasses on white linen, the faint scent of smoke still lingering somewhere in my memory. Jason and I stood alone by the balcony doors, the city glittering beyond the glass. He stared down at his phone, the screen glowing faintly. I saw his expression shift. The hardness of anger replaced by something heavier. Regret. She sent a message, he said quietly, handing me the phone. It was from his father. A brief update written with the tone of a man accustomed to reports, not emotions. She's home. She's shattered. She's agreed to therapy. It's a start. A start, not redemption. Not forgiveness. Just the first crack in the armor of a woman who had believed herself untouchable. Jason's voice trembled slightly. Do you think I'll ever be able to forgive her? I thought about it. Really thought about it. In the Army, forgiveness isn't a command you follow. It's a process. You triage the wound, stop the bleeding, then decide if it's safe to move forward. Forgiveness is something we give ourselves, I said finally. It frees us from the weight, but trust, that's earned back one action at a time. Until then, we keep our perimeter secure. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Boundaries, he murmured. Rules of engagement, I corrected gently. Even in peace, we stay alert. Outside, the air was cool and clean, a welcome change from the heavy tension that had filled every breath earlier. The night breeze carried the faint sound of laughter from a few stragglers leaving the courtyard. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn echoed like a bugle at dusk. We stepped out onto the balcony. The city skyline stretched before us, Cleveland's steel and glass catching the moonlight, each window a tiny star. For the first time all evening, I let myself breathe. Jason slipped his arm around me, his warmth grounding me against the cool night air. "You know," he said softly, "when she lit that fire, I thought everything was over. The wedding, my family, us." I turned to him, the faintest smile tugging at my lips. Fires don't just destroy, they reveal what can't burn. He looked at me then, really looked, not at the uniform beneath the dress or the medal on my chest, but at the woman who'd stood through it all. "I'll never forget what you said in there," he whispered. "You have no idea what you've just done." Turns out she didn't. She made you visible. I let out a breath that was half a laugh. "She gave me a battlefield," I said quietly, "and I used it." Below us, the faint sound of applause still echoed from a passing group of guests. Or maybe it was just memory. Either way, it no longer mattered. The day had tested every part of me: discipline, restraint, composure. And in the end, those things had held. That was the real victory. 3 months later, I stood in the same ballroom, this time in a tailored navy suit instead of ivory. Behind Richard on the stage, the new emblem of the Phoenix Initiative shimmered, a bird rising from flame, a symbol born from the ashes of my ruined wedding dress. The irony wasn't lost on me. Some battles we win with force, others with example. As I watched the launch event unfold, veterans shaking hands, local leaders pledging support, I understood something deeper. Margaret's fire hadn't ruined me. It had redefined the mission. When the speeches ended, a young Air Force veteran approached me. She was nervous, eyes shining. "Captain Harvey," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I saw your story. It gave me courage to start over. I just wanted to say, thank you." Her words landed softly but carried the weight of everything that mattered. That night, I finally understood what my father meant when he said you can't choose the fires you face, only how you walk through them. We had walked through, Jason and I, and emerged stronger, because sometimes the quietest strength is the one that doesn't seek revenge, only balance. And sometimes the fiercest act of defiance is to keep building when someone tries to burn you down. If you've ever seen someone underestimated until they proved everyone wrong, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story reminded you that calm doesn't mean weak, that discipline isn't silence, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. We share new stories every day, real lessons in respect, dignity, and quiet strength. Until next time, stand tall, stay steady, and remember, authority is earned, not given.